this video, we're quickly going to cover the functionality provided by the CutAway Shader with these buttons down here. The first thing to note that when you add the CutAway Shader with Shift-A, Shader Effects, Add CutAway Shader, is that it adds two nodes, this node here and this node here, that you stitch into your materials for the selected object. The shader here is running an OSL shader script, an open shader language script that does the work of the actual cutaway. The node here to the left is a Python custom node which makes it easier to use the OSL node by providing some automated functionality, and we're going to go through each of these buttons quite quickly just to see what they do. As a quick summary, the buttons up here allow you to set up the CutAway Shader node automatically. There are some plane selection buttons here where you can add or select the cutaway plane in the scene. There can be multiple planes. There's also some Solidify options down here to help automatically solidify your object as just shown here, and there are also some options to automatically add a rim fill to your cutaway object. There are also some controls here that help you select what shape cutaway shader you have. You can have rectangular shape or a circular shape, and you can actually edit the shapes as we'll see later on. You can also control the fade off distance for the cutaway effect, and we'll look into that. There are some nodes down here to help with parenting, which is very important. There are often many objects and materials that you want to add a basic shader setup to. You can set up the first object to cutaway how you like, and then you can copy that basic setup to all the selected objects in the scene, and it automatically creates child nodes. And there are also a few buttons down the bottom here just to help with viewport management and refreshing when you've got lots of keyframing action going on. So let's get into it. We'll start up a new setup scene, and we will add the cutaway plane from scratch and work through the buttons. I've got a basic scene set up here just with a default cube, a camera, and one sun, and this is showing the camera view in this panel here, and at the moment we're on GPU rendering mode, showing the rendered view. So let's just quickly change the color of the cube a little bit, make it a little bit yellow. So the first step is we're going to add the cutaway plane, and I'll make some space for it. So Shift-A, Shader Effects, CutAway Shader, and now we've added the actual cutaway shader. Now we're going to stitch it in to our scene by taking the output of whatever material node we set up here, putting it into shader in, and connecting the OSL shader out to the material output. And you'll see that the cube goes black, and that's because this is an open shader language shader, and at the moment we've got it on GPU compute. So this is the first button to help us set it up. You'll get a warning here if it's not in CPU and OSL mode. So we just click this button here, and it automatically puts the Blender setting to CPU and open shader language. Some people may be wanting to do the rendering in GPU, but the open shader language currently only works in CPU setup. But generally for shader transitions, they're probably pretty quick, and it's probably not going to affect your rendering too much. So that's the first button, just some setup there. The next thing that we're going to use in the shader setup is automatically adding the cutaway plane, and it'll be added to the cursor position. So simply just click Add Cutaway Plane, and it will be added to the cursor position. And to see it in the viewport, it's often helpful to select the object that's going to be cut away, and let's shift that into wireframe mode. So select the object icon, and if we come down to the minimum draw type, just change that to wire, and now we can see the added cutaway shader plane. It can also be helpful to click the viewport shading into material mode, and the added cutaway plane is automatically shaded green in the viewport on the side that's to be cut away, and red on the side that will not be cut away. So if we select the cutaway plane, we can now scale that up, and if you rotate it, so RXX to rotate along its own x-axis, you can see in the viewport that it's cutting away as desired in real time. If we scale this down, we can see it's cutting a hole. If I reset the rotation with Alt R, and then go R, Y, Y to rotate along the Y axis. You can see it's now cutting away the Y axis. So in summary, we've set up the shader to do OSL shading, CPU rendering, and we've easily added a cutaway plane. Now you can add multiple cutaway planes to the scene. If I just move this plane off to the side here, so it's just cutting away this side. Let's add another cutaway plane to the scene, so we just go add cutaway, and so you can see it's automatically added another cutaway plane. If I go GXX to move it along the plane's axis to this side, and then rotate it along the x-axis, actually let's rotate it along the y-axis, RYY, and scale it in with scale, you can see that the plane is cutting away as it should. If I go GZZ, move it up, there we go. So we can see it's just cutting away this rectangle. If we want to jump back to this plane here, we can just select it again from select cutaway plane. So let's select number 1, and now the shader is going back to using that cutaway plane. I'll just delete this plane now and reset the position of this one with Alt R and Alt S, and whoops, and I'll just move it back into the middle, GXX, scale it down. Okay, so adding a cutaway plane is pretty easy. The next thing that we're going to look at is some of the automatic Solidify options, and they're just down here. The Solidify Active Object and Rim Fill Enable options are useful when you automatically want to give the illusion of depth to your model, as shown in here. Here's how it works. The way that you automatically solidify your object is just click the Solidify button. First you've got to select the object you want to solidify, so let's select our main cube here, and we'll go Solidify, and it's automatically added a solidifier modifier to the object and given it a different material so we can see it. Just one last thing about the materials, we can see that the inner materials material index number 1, and if we look on the solidifier modifier, we can see that the material index offset is 1. If we set it to 0, the inner material is just going to be shaded the same as the outer material. And of course we could add whatever inner material shading we want just by going back to the main node here. So if we want to make it an inner red, blue, green material, we can just change the shading to the side. It may be also desirable in some cases to change this from a diffuse shader to an emission shader. Often it's quite dark inside the cutaway areas and you may get a bit of speckle noise. If you do use an emission shader, and we just lower the strength down a bit, we can see that all the noise has gone, but we may want to turn off some of these ray visibility settings here, for example diffuse, glossy, shadow, volume and transmission, so it doesn't light up any other internal objects that may be inside this cutaway object. And if we want to see where the rim is here, where the cutting away is going on, we can click Enable Rim Fill, and now we can see the rim of the object here. It's been showed automatically. We can deselect it or select it. If you want to make the rim thicker, just go along to the modifier and increase the thickness as shown here, and so now you can see that that rim is thicker. And if I rotate the plane, we can see that the rim is added here. Just a little bit of background information about how this rim is drawn. For example, to draw the portion of the rim as shown here, there is actually no mesh to shade, and so the CutAway Shader uses an optical illusion trick and actually draws it on the other side of the mesh to make it look like it's coming from the far side. When we look from the camera's point of view, we can see that the mesh point that is chosen aligns exactly where it needs to be. Although the optical illusion trick works well, you can run into a few difficulties when using the rim shader. You notice that at this angle here, the rim becomes discontinuous and is actually dark over here. This is because on this side of the object, the point of the mesh chosen for the optical illusion to fill in the rim shader is also dark. In the future, a displacement shader may be able to rectify this, but for the moment a good workaround is actually to change from the default diffuse shader as we've been seeing and change to emission shader, which is unaffected by the lighting of your scene. You can see that when that is done, now we're getting even shading throughout the scene. Another effect that you might see when you use the automatic rim fill is that on cube objects, sometimes at the corners here you can get a discontinuity in the rim, and that's just a product of the algorithm that's currently used. That may be updated at a later date, but a workaround for that is to generally make the rim width a little bit thinner, and also if you add a slight bevel to your curves, then that will fill in quite nicely as shown here. So just in summary, to solidify your object, select the object you want to solidify, the one being shaded, click the solidify button, and then click rim fill. This brings us to the rim occlusion enable button. If you click the button, you may not notice any effect, but here's a little bit of background information about how it works. If the rim occlusion enable button is not checked and we have an object inside of our cutaway object, we can see that the rim will be drawn over the top of the object. It won't be occluded as it should be behind the object, and we know that's because the rim fill is an optical illusion. In the case here, this piece of rim that has been shaded is actually being drawn on the other side of the shader, and it is in front of the object inside our cutaway object, and therefore it will just draw over the top of it. Now if you click the rim occlusion enable button, the rim will be correctly occluded, and so by default the option is generally left on. Here we can see occlusion on, and here we can see occlusion off. If you don't have any objects inside your cutaway object, you may find that turning off the rim occlusion enable results in a slightly faster rendering. This will only be the case for complex shaped objects such as Suzanne shown here. For a cube type object, it will probably make no difference at all. Okay, now we're going to look at some of the controls we can use to change the shape of the cutaway plane. They come from this drop down menu here. We can choose from rectangular, circular, and we can cut away from an arbitrary image shape, and in addition we can also just edit the vertices of these planes, which we'll look at after this segment. So let's move this cutaway plane in the prepared scene here, GZZ, to drag it into the cube, and you can see that we're cutting away on the green side of the plane as normal in a rectangle shape. If I edit the shape of the plane, scale YY to move the plane and scale the plane in its local y-axis, we can see we're changing the shape of the cutaway plane. If we change the shape, scale the shape of the plane in the x-axis, you can see that now we've got a rectangle cutaway plane. We can also choose from circular. So if I choose circular here, we can see it's quickly gone to circular. Also note if I move the plane from behind the cube, it's cutting away the front and the back faces of the cube as we'd expect. And if I turn on a checkered pattern here, we can see the checkered pattern is showing up on the back side of this cube here. So the circular plane, as before, if I just move this forward again, if we scale it in its local y-axis, SYY, we can see that we can make a kind of a horizontal elliptical shape, and if I scale it in its local x-axis, we've got a vertical elliptical shape. The elliptical cutaway shape can be quite useful for cutting away landscape scenes, as you can see from this example, and you can see there's a bit of an arc here where the cutaway is occurring in the background. Now, quite an interesting cutaway effect you can use is when you choose cutaway from image, which allows you to use a grayscale image to decide what part of the model gets cut away. So let's choose from image, and we'll use this icon here to open up the texture we want. So let's choose this love image, and you can see that now the mesh is totally being cut away in the white part of the image and is left intact in the black part of the image. If I just hide Suzanne for a moment, move the cutaway plane GZZ behind the cube, and let's just turn on the checker pattern. You can see that we can see the areas behind the cube here that have been cut away. We can rotate around as well, and we can see the back has been cut away as well. Let's just move it back to the front again. There is also an invert button. The invert button, when using the from image setting, just inverts what gets cut away. So now instead of the white portion of the image being cut away, the black portion of the image has been cut away, and vice versa. So you can get quite a bit of control here. We can select, if I just move this plane forward again, and let's turn back on Suzanne. Let's choose another image. We can choose these prison bars here, for example, and now instantly we have a prison bar effect. We haven't had to model any of these bars, and you can see Suzanne is locked up behind the bars here. If we just turn off the checker pattern here and turn off the bright sunlight as well, you can see that there's actually a light inside this prison scene, and you can see it's actually casting the silhouette shapes exactly as you'd expect, as if you'd actually modeled the mesh by hand. And you can see that if we move the cutaway plane behind the main cube, we can see through the back part of the cube as well. Let's just rotate that around. But you can see it's also cut away the back. I'll just turn on the bright sunlight again. And so you can get some quite interesting effects with this quite quickly. If I scale this image up, for example, it'll start to, if I scale the cutaway plane up, for example, get some quite interesting effects. So if I scale, and it'll start to cut away the whole cube, leaving kind of an instant bar shape effect. So this would take quite a while to model, but just using these images you can get some quite interesting effects. If I just turn off Suzanne for the moment, if you want an instant sort of window effect, ornate window or a fire grating or something like that, you could just load the image here to cut away, and you can see instantly you've got a nice cutaway grate shape. So the images so far that we've been looking at have been pretty much black and white, but it also works in grayscales, and so if the image has a grey area in it, anywhere between a 0 and 1 on the brightness scale, the mesh will just be partially cut away, be made partially transparent, and we will look at that next. In this scene here, we've got a cutaway image selected, this ornate window shape, which has come from this JPEG image, and we're going to replace it with a grayscaled image. But just first of all, we can see the outline of the mesh here that's been cut away, and the outline that's been left intact. And we can also see some shadows being cast through here because we have a light inside the cube. So let's replace this black and white image with a grayscale image here of a wolf against the moon. And you can see the wolf is in silhouette, but there are definitely grayscales in the moon. So let's load that image up, and we can see now it is the cutaway image for this object. We can clearly see the silhouette. It's a little bit harder to see the grayscales here, but they are there. And so instead of fully cutting away the mesh and having it fully transparent, the mesh is now partially transparent behind here. And if we actually zoom out a little bit from here and turn on a screen that's in the scene, and let's just reposition this a little bit and dim the lights. We'll turn off one of the lights in the scene. We can clearly see that the wolf is in silhouette and the grayscale areas are showing up here in the moon. So this is quite an interesting technique you can use to cut away portions of your image, portions of your scene I should say, using these images. So if you instantly need to add a window to your scene of a certain shape and you don't want to ruin the UV settings, you can just cut away the portions of the wall as you'd like it. Or if you want to make a strange cartoon hole cutaway shape as the cartoon character bursts through the wall, you can just quickly draw up the shape that you want and try different shapes to see which one suits best. In summary, we've learnt to change the cutaway shape as shown here by choosing either the rectangular setting or the circular setting drop down for the cutaway shape, or even using a grayscale image to determine what gets cut away. The last method we'll be looking at allows us to achieve this kind of jagged cutaway shape that you see in this example here, or in these buildings where we can see they've got a bit of a jagged cutaway section on each of the buildings. Or even if you're cutting away a portion of a building to put a window in at a late stage, you can do a cutaway and put something like a window in here, and it won't affect any of your texturing that you've done. And we'll learn how to do that now. What we're going to do is actually edit the vertices of the cutaway plane to change its shape, and then press refresh vertices to show the changes. And here's how we do it. First, select the cutaway plane. I'm in top-down view, so the plane is horizontal. So select the cutaway plane, press tab to go into edit mode, and let's select this top edge here. Now we're going to press space and type in sub, and choose subdivide, and let's put a few subdivisions in. If we go Shift R, it'll repeat that, and Shift R one more time. Now if we go into vertex editing mode by pressing this little icon here, we can see that we've subdivided these edges. So let's also do that for this edge here. Now we can just press spacebar, subdivide, or Shift R will also work to repeat it. Let's choose this edge down here and just press Shift R a few times to subdivide it as well. Press this, select this edge over here, and let's subdivide that. Now if we press this vertice, we can see this vertice icon. We can see all the vertices that we have added. Now what we're going to do is just drag them around a little bit. So I might grab every second one and just move them up. I could grab every second one here, move them out, and let's grab every second one here. I'm just going Shift right click, grab them down, and let's grab these two outwards. It's important to know that we're dragging them on a plane, we're not dragging them vertically. If you do happen to drag it vertically, like say we grab this one upwards, what we can do is we can just select them all and go scale Z0 or scale ZZ0, so SZZ 0, and now if we look at it on the side, we'll see it's all flat again. So that's pretty important. So now we've made a rough shape. Now we might just want to fine tune the shape a little bit. So let's just grab some of these around a little bit just to make it look a little less clinical. Grab that one up a bit and press tab to exit edit mode. Now no changes have been shown here, but as soon as we press refresh vertices, the changes that we made will be reflected in the cutaway shape, and now you can see we actually have a jagged cutaway shape. If I move the camera around a little bit and have a look at it on this edge, you can see that it truly is cut away, a bit like an eggshell in this case. Now it's a little bit hard to see. These cutaway effects often look best if there's a rim shader. So what we're going to do, as we did in the last section, is to select the object that we're cutting away, that's the cylinder, and let's go Solidify active object, which we'll do now, and then choose from this setting here. We can choose no rim, which is the default, or choose emission rim shader, which will shade
the rim as shown here using an emission shader, or you can shade it using a diffuse shader. And as we saw in the earlier section, sometimes there can be issues with the diffuse shader depending on the lighting. So let's choose the emission shader here. If it's too bright, we can reduce the brightness of that rim just by pulling down the rim effect mix. If we pull it down to 0, we'll see no rim effect. If we bring it up a little bit, we can get the shading we want. If you want to change the color of it, just come along to the shader itself, and we can move this color. If we wanted a green color, we could move that over here, so we can change whatever color we want on the rim, or even how bright the light is. And that looks quite good. Let's just have a look at it from the side here. Move the camera around, and we can see we've got quite a good cutaway shape there. So that's pretty easy. In summary, just select the plane, edit the vertices in the plane, and then importantly choose refresh vertices. Now there is a couple of things to be aware of in this alpha release for this arbitrary shape. You can't have an infinite number of vertices. You're allowed somewhere between 30 to 50 vertices. I can't remember the exact number now. This is possibly due to a bug in the implementation of OSL, although it could be a bug in my code. I'm yet to determine which. Now here's a little bit more information about how the jagged edges are calculated, and there's a few restrictions. You can't, for instance, have very weird shapes where you have some jagged section out here, because the rim won't actually be shaded properly, and the reason why is shown in the next few slides. In the earliest versions of the CutAway shader, if this was the CutAway plane, the shader decided if a pixel should be transparent or not just by checking if the pixel was inside the CutAway plane's box, inside the width or the height, and if it was, it could make the pixel transparent. But to allow jagged edges to be drawn, the algorithm was updated, so instead of just checking were you inside a square, what it does is the CutAway shader checks if the pixel to be shaded is inside each of these triangles. And what that allows us to do is then change the number of vertices on the outside of our cutaway shape and split it into a section of triangles. And just for ease of implementation initially for the alpha release, it draws the center vertice of the triangle in the geometrical center of an object. And this allows you to get a reasonably arbitrary shape just by checking if, by working through all these triangles and seeing if the shape should be cut away. And it also allows us to know where the rim should be drawn because we know all the edges for the triangles. However, there's a few drawbacks to this method, and one is that if you have a vertex here and a vertex here, but your next vertex is up here, there's no actual straight line between this vertex and the center of our object that doesn't cut through some sort of edge, and this is not allowed. When we do the test, the shader will get confused. So when adding your vertices, when adding your edges, just try to imagine, is there a clear sight between the vertex that you're adding and roughly the center of the object? It's probably not too much of a problem in most cases, but it is just a bit of a limitation to be aware of. So you can't get truly arbitrary cutaway shapes where there's no straight line from the edge to the center. Now that we've seen how to change the cutaway shape by choosing the appropriate shape from the drop-down box here, or by editing the vertices of the plane and then selecting refresh vertices, we can now look at what some of these other buttons do. Very simply, they change the origin of the cutaway plane. If I look from the top view here, we've got the cutaway plane selected, and if I click edge 1, the origin of the cutaway plane immediately moves to edge 1, edge 2, edge 3, edge 4, and we can just keep circling around or circling back. and center presses it to the center. And even if you want to put the cursor in some arbitrary position, you can set the origin of the cutaway plane to the cursor. Now, the reason that this can be quite useful is when preparing cutaways for large landscapes and even small models, it can be quite difficult sometimes to position the cutaway so that the edge in the landscape ends up in the right place. So by selecting the appropriate edge, for instance setting the origin of the plane to this edge here, now allows us to scale the plane from this origin point. If I press S now, you'll see that the plane is now scaling from that origin point, and we can see in real time the effect up the top there. If I shift it back to the center and rescale the plane, you can see now how we can scale it from the center. And if we choose one of these other edges here, let's choose the side edge here, now we can scale it from this edge here. And if we go scale XX, we can just scale along this side. If we move this edge to the bottom, and go scale YY, now we can just scale this plane here. So to demonstrate how setting the origin of the cutaway plane to one of the edges is useful in a landscape setting, let's look at this prepared scene here where we want to add a cutaway plane into the ground. You can see in the prepared scene that we've got the ground projected onto this mesh here, and we've got some underground features just laying out here. So the first step is, let's just click in the connect in the CutAway Shader to this ground plane that was selected here, or ground mesh. And it'll go black when we first select in the CutAway Shader. So let's just set its texture mode to wire. Now there's already a cutaway plane enabled for this shader, cutaway plane number 2, and here we can see it in the scene here. It's green on the side where it's going to cut away and red on the side where it's not going to cut away, and we can already see it's putting a small hole in the scene. Now if we want to position this in our scene, we would probably want to scale this plane, and if we just scale it from the center point as normal, it can be quite hard to get it into the right position. So one technique is to move the plane. If I just grab it on the Y, we grab it to roughly where the camera is going to see it, just here, and now we might scale its width, SXX in this case, and that doesn't look too bad here. But now if we're going to scale it to set this point here up, when we start scaling, you can see that it's getting wider, and it's also growing along these dimensions, but a bit more slowly than we'd like. So an easy way to try and set this edge is just to move the origin of the cutaway plane to this bottom edge. So just simply click this edge button. Number 1 is the first one, but if we can choose any edge we want, but number 1 is the first one that we want. And now if we go scale YY, for instance, it's going to keep the bottom edge where we want to, and the top edge can move up. Now it can be quite useful for these landscape type of cutaways to have a bit of a curve on this edge here. So let's also select circular, and that'll give it a bit of a curve, and we can grab the plane, pull it back a little bit down here, and now we can again go scale YY to try and get our top point in the right position, scale XX to widen it out. It's starting to look a bit better, GYY to pull it back a little bit, and that's starting to look a bit better. Scale YY, and that's looking pretty good. Scale XX. So now we've very quickly added a cutaway plane to the scene. Another thing that can make these cutaways, it looks quite clinical with this very sharp edge here. So if we increase the fade off distance just a very small amount, it's quite a big area we've got here. 0.06, 0.08, We can also increase the sharpness here. So just adding a little bit of a blur can make that look better. So just in summary, using these instantly setting the origin of the plane to these edges makes it very quick to scale the plane in the manner that you want. You can also use it in animation, where if you wanted to scale the whole plane as the reveal, you can scale this down and have it scale from this edge as part of the reveal, and you can do that in other models too, or you can even set it to the origin to the cursor position. We could just arbitrarily put up here, set the plane origin to the cursor position, and now when we scale it's going to scale up to the cursor position if that was useful. Just by clicking center puts it back to the center again. Another useful way to reveal your cutaway is to change the cutaway effect mix. If we pull this slider down to 0, we can see that the cutaway effect is not there at all, and we can gradually increase the effect, and it's like mixing it into the scene. Now we're going to look at one of the most useful set of controls on the CutAway Shader, and these are the parenting controls, and we can see them here. If I just add the CutAway Shader, and the parenting controls are these 4 or 5 buttons here that allow you to add multiple versions of this CutAway Shader, or child versions of this particular CutAway Shader, to your object. And here's how it works. Let's say we've got a scene that we want to do a cutaway. Perhaps we want to cut away some section here, and we've prepared a nice little jagged cutaway plane that we want to apply. And so we've added the CutAway Shader to one of the nodes here. Let's say it would make sense to cut away this fuselage node here. So if we select the fuselage of the plane, and we have the fuselage material up, there's quite a few different sorts of materials. If I just unpin this, there's the interior, there's window materials, but let's actually just add the cutaway plane to the main fuselage material, and I'm just going to pin this node here. We've already prepared our cutaway shape here, so let's select it. It's number 2, and let's add the cutaway plane to the scene as we usually do. We just take the default material. Instead of having it go to the material output, we just route it through the CutAway Shader, and then take the CutAway Shader's output to the material output. And as we'd expect, nothing is cut away yet, because the cutaway plane, it's good to cut away on the green side and not okay to cut away on the red side. The cutaway plane doesn't have anything in front of it yet. So let's move it inside the plane, and we might expect that it would cut away part of the plane. We can see it sort of does. Let's cut away the fuselage, because we've only selected the fuselage, but we still can't see inside the plane. There's this other strange material here. We can see some windows that haven't been cut away, and so in summary, we've only added this parent cutaway plane to one of the materials, to the fuselage, and so wherever this material is used, it will be cut away. But we may need to add it to this object. There could be other objects inside the plane that we can't see yet. We could select like these vertical support bars here, the interior struts. We want to cut away those too. And it would be quite a lot of work if we had to go through the wireframe and select every type of object and its perhaps multiple materials to cut away. In addition, even just the fuselage itself, we can see has quite a few materials. So this is how the parenting works. And what we do is we select all the objects that we would like to cut away. So let's just, to make it easy on ourselves, let's just select the entire plane. I'm just going to box select it. So that's every object on the plane now selected. I've pinned this fuselage material here with our cutaway plane in it. I'm going to say add this particular cutaway shader and all its settings, add a child version of this shader to all objects and all materials in these objects. It's going to take about 20 or 30 seconds to do. So I'll do that now. I'm going to go add, and we can see it's thinking about it. And when it finishes, what we should be able to do is, well, first of all, we should see a hole appear here where the cutaway has occurred. And let's just have a look at that. We can see that there now, and actually have an object inside the plane, inside the aeroplane, which should start rendering now. This Hummer vehicle here. So if you had objects inside the plane, a tank or some seats or some passengers or whatever you happen to be cutting away, they should be now visible. I just had that hidden initially because when I box selected the plane, I didn't want to box select this vehicle as well. So just in summary there, we can see that adding, using this parenting here is a very quick way to add a version of this CutAway shader to any object or material in the scene. In this case, we just added the cutaway plane to all of them. And let's have a look at what some of those, let's have a look at what the child objects look like. So for instance, because I selected every object in the scene, this propeller here also had a child cutaway shader added to it. And here's what it looks like here. That propeller had this material here, and you can see that these two nodes have automatically been added into the propeller material here, the propeller tip material. Now, as you can imagine, this can get quite complicated when you have many objects in the scene. It can be hard to know what nodes are where. You may have multiple cutaway planes and many different sorts of parents. And so there's some helpful tools to help us navigate back. So for instance, if we select this propeller, we can see it's using the same material. If we want to actually jump to the parent node that controls this cutaway shader, because you can see there are no settings we can make on it, they're all done by the parent, we can just click the jump to parent node and it'll find the parent and select it and show the original cutaway shader. This can be quite useful if you've got many objects in the scene, because it can be very hard to find those parents. If we select the propeller again and see some of these other features we can use, I'll just try that one more time. I'll select the propeller there. So we can jump to the cutaway node, the parent. We can also just select the parent in the scene. So if I click the select button, as you might remember, the fuselage was selected. But just a note on that, if we actually click the fuselage here, and let's try that again, we can see the fuselage itself has multiple materials, one of which is called fuselage. Let's say we have selected this window material that's part of the fuselage. A cutaway shader has also been added to it, a child cutaway shader. And sometimes when you jump to the parent, it selects the parent object, that's what its job is, but it doesn't necessarily select the parent material. So if we come back here to propeller and jump to parent node, it can be a bit confusing because it looks like we've just jumped to another child node, which we have. But if we select the fuselage, we can see we get the main material back again. Now if I just close this, now this is a little bit non-standard. In some ways this is one of the best features of the cutaway shader helper controls, and perhaps one of the most annoying too, because this is an alpha release, and probably if anything is going to go wrong with this alpha release, it's jumping between parents, or if you erase materials or reassign materials, it tries to keep track of it all. But being an alpha release, it doesn't always manage. And this is, if you're going to run into problems, it's probably in the rim shading or in this parenting business. Let's see what some of these other buttons. So we could see that we could easily add this cutaway shader to pretty much everything into the scene in one go, or just selected objects. And even though I added it to the whole propeller, we may have just hit the C button, for example, here, and just, whoops, let's try that again, and just wanted to select a small portion of it. But you can see, even if you're trying to select just a small portion of your object, often you select more than you want, and you may have actually already, without knowing it, added the cutaway shader to an area of the model that maybe you don't want to cut away. So, for example, if I select this propeller again, it isn't in front of the cutaway. Well, let's try a different propeller. Let's try this one here. It's not in front of the CutAway shader at the moment, so we can see it in the image here, and it's not being cut away. But if I move the CutAway plane, let's just grab it here. If I can grab it, let's try that one more time. Try and grab the CutAway plane. Got it. And let's just move it up and over, so it's going to be in front of the propeller. You can see that the propeller is now being cut away from the scene because the CutAway shader is in front of it. And so we might want to remove the CutAway shader from the propeller, so that it's very quick to do that. Let's just select the propeller, and we can see up here in this node, this is the propeller's, one of the propeller's materials with the child CutAway shader. From our parent CutAway shader, we can just say remove the child from the selected objects. So I've selected the propeller. Now I'm going to remove any child shaders of this shader here from the selected objects. Let's do it now, and we can see that it's searched through the entire scene, found the selected child object and all its materials, removed the CutAway shader child from it, and now we can see the propeller. Or maybe you made a mistake. Maybe you're thinking, I'd like to re-add this propeller as a child node of this parent CutAway shader, in which case we've got the propeller selected, and we can just add the child CutAway node again, and then it's back in again. You can see it's automatically added in the child shader. You may be wondering why it doesn't add an exact copy of the big parent shader here, and that's because the parent shader is responsible for updating all settings in all the child nodes. So for example, if you want to reduce the cutaway rim effect, if I put it down to 20%, you'll see this propeller start to fade in. Let's make it, say, 75% cutaway. Now you can see this propeller's gone a bit translucent. And so any changes that you make to the parent cutaway shader node will be automatically copied to all the children, and there may be hundreds of children in the scene. And this is very useful if you're animating these nodes. You might want to fade in, do an animation fade in, so you can just keyframe the setting here, and every frame the CutAway shader will take care of updating all the parent nodes. So let's just remove this one again from the scene. Remove shader, and we can see the propeller is now showing again. Okay, so let's just summarize the operation of these 5 parenting buttons with this simple scene. I've just got 3 different color cubes and a cyan sphere, and each of the cubes has its own material. The red cube has a red material, the yellow cube has a yellow material, the green cube has a green material, and the cyan sphere has a cyan material. And at the moment you can see that if I select the red cube, then the red material is showing, and it has the CutAway plane on it. And if I move the CutAway plane up and down, we can see that the cube is being cut away as we'd expect. I'm just going to pin that parent node now. Now you notice that the plane here is intersecting with this yellow cube, but it's not cutting it away in this rendered viewport. And if I just scale it up a little bit, let's just move the highlight node to this edge here. Let's go scale XX, and let's just move the CutAway plane so it's could be cutting away through everything, but I've only applied the CutAway plane to this red cube here. So let's move the CutAway plane up, GZZ, and we can see that even though the CutAway plane is going through all those materials, it's only cutting away the red cube. Now say if I wanted to add the green cube, I wanted to cut away the green cube as well. All I have to do is select the green cube. Now here we can see it's selected, and using the parent CutAway shader, remember it's parented to this red cube object, I'm going to select Add Child CutAway Shader to Selected Objects. You see I've got the green selected. Here we go. And now you can see that the CutAway shader has also been added to that child object, and if I move it up, GZZ, we can see it's cutting away the red and the green. And we saw that before with the plane, but it might be just a little bit simpler here to see it on the simple scene, not cutting away on the red side, cutting away to selected objects, anything that this parent CutAway shader is attached to, cutting it away. Let's see some of the other parameters that are copied over. Let's just select the CutAway plane, move it back to the center. I'm just going to scale it down, scale XX, scale YY, and move it back to the center of this cube, just scale it down a bit more. So you can see it's cutting away this cube, and if I move the CutAway plane over, we can see it's cutting away this cube as we'd expect. If we change the CutAway type to circular, we can see this one is being cut away as circular, and if I move, and if I move the plane over this side, you can see this setting is also cut over. So quite a few of these settings are cut over. The edge fade distance should be moved over. We can see there's got a bit of a fade there, GXX, GXX to move this over, and we can see there's also all the fade settings have been cut over as well. So that's the purpose of having these child nodes. Everything from the parent node is copied over. As before, if I wanted to change my mind and remove this cube here, remove the child shader, we just go remove child shader, and the CutAway shader has been removed from that node. If I want to add all these, or say the yellow object in the cyan sphere, I can just select those two, and again simply just go add CutAway shader to child objects, and now it's added child CutAway nodes to the selected objects. Now there's a few other handy functions. If I just put this in wireframe mode, so at the moment we've got 3 objects being cut away in a scene. It's quite a simple scene here, and we know that the red one has the parent node attached. That's this one here. But what say we were somewhere in quite a complex scene, and we selected the blue sphere, and we wanted to know where is the parent object, because we want to find our parent node to play with. Well, we can just select it by going select parent, and you can see it's selected the parent, which means we could now click it and we could see our parent node, or in fact we could just jump to the parent node and it'll find the parent node for us and jump to it, so we can modify some more settings. And again, that can be quite useful if you've got hundreds of objects and hundreds of materials. You can also have multiple parents in the scene. So for example, let's just scale down this plane a little bit. So scale XX and GXX. I'm going to move it over here. Now you might remember that this green material doesn't have a CutAway shader added to it yet. So let's add one. So I'm going to click the green material and display its node tree. And let's just add a new CutAway shader to it. And let's add a new CutAway plane as well. The CutAway plane will add to the cursor position. So let's put the cursor position in the center here. Go add CutAway plane. Scale up a little bit. Let's just go into wireframe mode. Scale. Let's try that one more time. We can see that the CutAway plane has actually been added to this layer that's hidden in this view. So I'm just going to show it again and move it to the viewport layer that we're looking at. So let's scale it up a bit and put that back in that mode there. So now I've got 2 CutAway planes, one here and one here. And let's just stitch this material in, so the usual way. So now I've got 2 independent CutAway planes in the scene. If I move this one up, you can see it's just cutting away the green, and if I move this one here up, it's just cutting away the yellow. In fact, I can scale it all the way over, even though it's cutting through, even though it looks like it's intersecting with the green, it hasn't been mapped to it. So if I move this up and down now, it's not affecting that green cube at all. Just this CutAway plane here is affecting it. So if you've got quite a complex scene with many cutaway shaders in the scene, you might want to find out which are the parent nodes in the scene. So if you're looking at one of the parent nodes, you can just go select all parent objects in the scene. And if I just deselect everything, you'll see it selected this. That was one of our parent objects, and it selected this one. Other handy things are if you're looking at a parent object, so let's just unpin this and select the red cube. We're looking at the red material here. We can select all objects that are child nodes of this parent object. So we go select child nodes, and as we know, this parent has these two objects as children. So that gives you quite a bit of flexibility. You can find out who the parents are in the scene, and for a given parent, you can find out what are the child objects in the scene. And because objects, of course, can all share a material, and the CutAway shader is added to a material, there might be many potential parent objects in the scene for a given CutAway shader, and you can just select them with this button. In this case, we've only got one. So these are very useful tools. Things to watch out for if you delete your materials or reassign them. The CutAway shader will try and keep up with that, but it doesn't always keep up with it, so save your work first. And this is an alpha version, so you may get bugs in this area. And just be aware it's a little bit non-standard in your node tree layout to be clicking buttons in the node tree layout and potentially affecting all materials in your scene. So just be aware that's a bit non-standard. This brings us to our last two buttons, the auto refresh and the manual refresh. And these buttons are used in the following way. As you know, it's possible to change the effect mix or many other parameters in the cutaway shader. So I can say there's no cutaway effect on the three objects being cut away here, the red cube, the green cube, and the blue cube. And as I move up the slider, you can see that the cutaway effect is starting to show. And we can keyframe that. So let's start with no cutaway at all, and I'm going to keyframe that by highlighting the arrow over here and pressing I, and we can see that a keyframe has been added here. And let's slide over to frame 60, for example, and pull the cutaway effect up to full value and press I again. So now we have keyframed the cutaway effect mix here. We've animated it. We're going from no cutaway to full cutaway as we grab the slider, and we can see that even though the main parent cutaway node here is the only one that we've animated, as you'd expect, this cutaway value is being cut to these child shaders on the yellow cube and on the cyan cube. So as we drag the slider along, the Python code in here is doing the job of making sure that all the child nodes in your scene are updated with the correct values. Now if you've got hundreds of objects in your scene, then this kind of auto refresh might be taking a long time, and it could be taking a long time to scroll the slider. You know, if you've got massive objects and hundreds of materials, there's quite a lot of data to iterate over. And so if you turn off the auto refresh, then you can move the slider around, and the keyframed value is not copied over anymore, but then you can just press manual refresh and it'll just do one refresh. We can move all the way over here, go manual refresh, and the appropriate values will be cut away. Most of the time you can probably just leave auto refresh on and have everything done for you. But that's the reason for having those two settings there. There are other settings apart from the cutaway effect mix that are copied over, and it may give you a bit of a speed up on some large scenes. Just one more quick note: if you find that the cutaway effect is not being updated as you slide along the timeline, a quick way just to get that going sometimes for this alpha release is just to save your work, close Blender and reopen it, and that appears to fix that issue in most cases. I think the only button we haven't really looked at is the delete all cutaway shader nodes, and if I just save my scene and press the button, then and choose OK, it will remove every cutaway shader from the scene. So save your work before removing all nodes from the scene. Well, that concludes the examination of each of these buttons in a reasonably quick format. Check out some of the other tutorials for a bit more in-depth information about how you can use the CutAway Shader and some of the effects you can see.